So this starts off with when we decided to get married. That day, it was December 29th when KDo came over. And I know this context is just like really amusing, but I think it's funny to share. So like when we decided to get married, I had researched like, hey, how long does it take to get married? On the internet. And so I looked it up, and in California, which is where we live, in Los Angeles, it literally takes a day. And so we're looking up places to go, and then we found this place in San Gabriel Valley, in Alhambra, called 1 Hour Marriage. I kid you not, it's called 1 Hour Marriage. And so we decided like, okay, let's like look it up, and let's call them. They have no appointments online. So we decided to call them the next day, and they're like, hey, come in on the last day of the year. And so when we decided to come in, we didn't tell anyone that we were gonna get married. We just decided that we would do it. And so my parents didn't know, KDo's mom didn't know, nobody knew. And so that's what happened. We went in, we signed the papers, we were out in 45 minutes instead of 1 hour. And so we did things a little bit out of order. So after we got married, we had told a few friends, few really close friends, and then we actually started hosting these sessions with Asian Mental Health Project. So those folks who have been in our sessions before like know that we were married. And it seemed like the last people that were gonna know were our parents. And so what ended up happening was, I got featured on Asian Boss Girls podcast a couple months ago. And in that podcast, I had mentioned that KDo is my husband. And so in that podcast, I wasn't expecting my family members to listen to it, because they typically don't listen to stuff that I'm featured on. But my cousin, for whatever reason, decided to. And so she messaged me and she was like, oh my God, Kevin is your husband? Question mark. And so I was like, oh shoot, I think it's time. Like we need to actually like let them know. So at this point though, before the podcast, um, even though we are married, I had told KDo like he needed to still
Yeah, we need to plant the
formally,
seed.
yeah,
We
still
need to plant the
formally
seed.
ask my parents,
Yeah.
because when we thought about it, we are thinking, hey, it doesn't make sense to just come in out of the blue and be like, hey, we're married. Even though that's what happened, I think it would shock my parents like too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so we actually had KDo actually ask my parents like formally. So one of the weekends in March, KDo and I were going over to visit my parents, and then we just decided like, hey, I think today is the day, like we're visiting them. Let's just do the formal ask and like see how it goes. And so we pull up to the house, and we go in, and my dad talks our ears off for
Always.
two
Our
hours.
dad always talks us off for like 2 hours because he talks to us about work and sometimes no social cues, just loves talking, loves like just sharing. I don't know if you have Asian parents or family members that talk your ears off, but we basically got there and we had the plan. I kind of had it in my head. I was like, okay, like the lead-in word I'm gonna say is like, I'm gonna look at them, I'm gonna put my hand out, and I'm gonna be like, so I have to tell you something. Like I want to tell you something. And I kept playing this, I kept playing this in my head over and over and over again. But it never happened. Like we sat through that for 2 hours because I couldn't interject. And so I looked at Steph. I was like, hey, we gotta go soon. We gotta go to something else. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'm gonna come back and we're gonna do it.
Yeah.
Just this is communicated through our eyes. I never said that, by the way.
And
Went to the
so
restroom, came back out, and
so
then
so he comes back out, and then out of nowhere, like a FaceTime ring like comes into my parents' phone.
your brother,
And it was my little brother. So for
like,
context,
fuck.
my little brother, he calls my parents every single day.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that he called at just the moment that KDo was about to tell my parents or like ask them for permission. So
So I'm sitting over here like, I'm like, okay, it's just gotta happen, like I'm gonna do it. Like, why did you have to be here? But I still have to say this. And so I just went in for it. I was like, hey, so like before we leave, like there's just something I really wanted to tell you. So I love Steph very much, and I just wanted to ask you the permission, like if I could marry her. And it kind of rolled off something like that.
Yeah, it was like that. And
And
then
her bro was like, uh, should I be here? And we were like, oh, like I was like, yeah, just stay here now. You're with us, right?
yeah, and so after he asked, then like so KDo asked, and then there's silence because I think my parents don't know how to respond to like what he's saying.
Yeah.
And then and at some point, after
Well,
like after some silence, then my mom was like, sure, if you guys are happy and you guys can support each other,
no,
then
no,
that's like good. That
I remember it. She kind of, they were both looking at each other and then they were looking down and they're like, sure, like, I mean, if you guys are happy, like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
how it started,
yeah.
like,
So like no emotion, like just kind of like it is what it is. And then like you can hear my little brother from the FaceTime, like, um, like really trying to help us out. He's like, I think they're trying to ask for a yes or no question, like, yes or no. Like, do you guys say that or yes or no? And I'm like, okay. And so it's like really awkward. We're all sitting in like this like really strange, like, okay, like what now? And so eventually my mom breaks the silence and she's just like, okay, well, like welcome to the family, which we obviously had to translate to like that that is acceptance like from them, right? And so
I mean, hold on, even before we got there, because I would read that as acceptance for sure. But before that, there was like this, honestly, this 5 minute period, 10 minute period that felt like another hour. And I was like, this is my first time doing this, trying to break the ice. I've never asked anyone before if I could marry them, for permission. They were like, us too, so it kind of like broke the ice a little bit more, which I thought was helpful. We were getting a little bit warmer, and then she finally said the welcome to the family thing,
yeah,
but then her dad wasn't really giving me that yet.
yeah, but then yeah, so it's kind of weird because like my mom said it and then my dad was like, yeah, like well he followed suit. He's like, yeah, welcome. And then of course we changed topics. And then we just talked about something else for the next hour before we left. And then once we left, I think like KDo and I were kind of confused because we were just like, okay, I think that's it. I think that's the okay.
Yeah.
And then we just kept going as if we were like everything was like normal. And then afterward we left and then they're just like, oh, like that's great. And then that was like us asking our parents. And so the next day I actually came back to my parents' place and my mom was just telling me, hey, like I know like she didn't mention anything about it until I brought it up and I was like, hey, so like yesterday was kind of funny, huh? Like, my brother called in and she's like, yeah, about that, I realized that when I say okay, it like it doesn't mean anything to you guys. Like I think she felt remorse, but then she didn't know how to explain that she felt remorse when she didn't have a reaction.
Yeah.
But she was just like, yeah, I just realized like when I say sure, when I say okay, it's just kind of like blah. And I was like, yeah, it does kind of land like that. And so yeah, we had a brief conversation about that. But yeah, that was the story of like how I had KDo ask my parents for permission
Mm-hmm.
to get married.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Um
And then we should tell him about like after he came back from Hawaii,
yeah,
when we
so
told him we were married, because we had to warm them up.
yeah, so yeah, so going back to earlier when my cousin found out that he like we were married, I decided like, okay, we gotta go and like tell them before, I don't know about you all, but like in my family, when one person knows, they tell somebody, they tell their mom tells everyone, and that's just like, it just kind of spreads like wildfire. And so I just told him like, hey, we got to go back and we got to like tell them ASAP. Otherwise, like they're gonna find out from somebody else. And I don't like that's my worst nightmare. I don't want them to find out from somebody else. So when we came back, Kira and I had been looking at rings. So again, very out of order. And so I was telling we were just gonna keep it very casual. I was gonna lead the conversation on letting them know that we're married. So we're like,
Another
hey,
2 hours again.
yeah, it was another 2 hours. So then we showed them some rings that we are looking at, and then eventually I was like, hey, um, just so you know, we signed the paperwork and it's official, like we're married. And then they looked at me and it was just like it was just a deadpan like face. There's like no emotions. And then they're like,
This is
oh,
round two.
okay. And so my dad was like, so did you guys like do that while you're on vacation? What like when did this happen? And so like that's how the conversation went. But there was like a lot less involvement or a lot less surprise this time, because basically it was just like, oh, the paperwork's done. Okay, great. Like now you guys are married, like you guys are officially like together. And so at that, oh yeah, by the way, my brother also FaceTimed in like right before we
Shit.
told him that too.
Same thing again.
So
was like,
same
oh
thing
my God.
happened.
At least we have him on our side, because last time, he got our back. If it was just us there and he didn't advocate for us and was like, come on, mom and dad, like, is it a yes or a no? We really would have been in the gutter. But he came back again, and I was like, you know what? Like, this is the second time. He can stay. He
Yeah.
can stay. And I don't know what he said this time, but he was like, I think he's
No,
cracking
I
up.
think he just cracked up and he
Yeah.
just said, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think like I think at this point we can share about maybe like
Well,
what it was like to
actually,
translate.
yeah, one more bit I wanted to talk about was like when we were talking about the rings. Okay. We're still gonna get Steph a ring. I still need to get Steph a ring. Um, and one of the things that we were talking about was lab grown rings versus real diamond rings.
They're both
And
real.
okay, yeah, they're both
Yeah.
real. But like the diamond ones, they cost more, and we've been talking about like where do we want to put our money, and can we use that to travel the world more and stuff like that. And so we were talking to our family, and we were talking about how at Tiffany's, like I think it was like Steph really liked this 3 carat ring that was like $80,000.
It was
And
way
like
too much.
we were like, yeah, like I probably would be paying that off for like the next 10 years, But if Steph wanted it, like I'll get it. Um, anyways, we told him that, and we told him that we were going to entertain a lab grown ring as well. And just the the level of judgment that I got from her mom and dad, like, what do your mom say?
My mom just was just like, "Oh, like I mean if that's what you're worth." And so
Yeah, and I was sitting there
I
like,
was
oh,
and I think it was like really amusing. So like I don't like, I don't blame my parents or like whatever their reaction is, but I was just like, damn, bro, like that was pretty harsh. Like I'm just not like I'm okay with like not even going with the diamond ring. Like it was just one of those like, oh, it's tradition. Like I see it, society says like you should, have these things, but like for me, like Kino and I are quite unconventional and like we prefer to do things like our own way. So I'm okay with not doing things the usual way. But it was just amusing, I think, to just get that kind of reaction, I think, from my mom and from my dad, just saying like, get the real thing, like get
yeah,
the real
yeah,
thing. I'm
yeah.
just like, dude, that was like unsolicited. Like I did not ask for your opinion on that, but just also like very Asian, like all at the same time.
Yeah, super. I mean, I shared that because there's a bit of translation there too, right? Like there's a sense of like what one generation's like view of like what love and significance means.
Yeah.
And like I'm not saying our generation's different, but it just so happens that me and Steph are doing things differently with them. And that kind of posed a challenge personally for me to be like, okay, like, so if I don't get her like the diamond, even though we've had these conversations on like how would we want to use our money and like stuff like that, like what does that say about me? Or like her parents definition of like and meaning into the actual ring started to kind of seep into like my consciousness. So like I'm still thinking about it today, you know, like it's still not over. Like, you know,
Yeah.
we still don't know.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like Steph's story for her side. And then we also had to tell my mom later
Yeah.
this year.
So I think we should like go into maybe the ways that we were translating
Yeah, yeah.
love with my parents' side. So, um, I feel like to nobody's surprise, like is like I don't think anyone's surprised by like the way that my family responded. But I think, in the aftermath when KDo and I were sort of processing like all that's happened, like if I were to be really honest, I think I was a little I think a little sad that my parents were not more, I think maybe receptive or more
Like
expressive, I think,
emotive.
like emotive
Yeah.
about like, him asking for permission. Like I know that they love him a lot. And they've known him for a really long time. Like even before we were dating, like they knew KDo. But I think if I were to be really honest, I think it was a little bit deflating, I think, to receive
Yeah.
the response that they did, just like, an okay, just like your very like, average, typical thing. Um, so I was initially, I think, a little bit disappointed, but I think, sitting with what was shared and sitting with like my mom, kind of the conversation the next day, I was like, wow, like actually, like if my mom's wanting to have this conversation or my mom's telling me like, hey, like I just didn't know what to say. Like I had to translate that as like, okay, she's probably feeling a little bit of guilt or a little bit of remorse for not being able to be as expressive, which is just hard because I sit with the reality of like, hey, like my parents didn't grow up with um that knowledge or that knowing of like how to express themselves, and yet they're in a situation where like, as a daughter, it's like I'm disappointed by that, but it's like I can't really expect them to, I think, emote or express in the ways that like me, in my generation, like we're able to. Um, and I think that like I really had to sit with like when my mom was saying like, hey, like welcome to the family, translation to like, hey, like you belong here, we accept you, like this is it's a very big deal, I think, for them to say that, and especially for my dad to say that. And so there's sort of this like, I think we're all familiar with that extra or additional effort with being able to translate some of the things that they're saying for it to then land as like, okay, that's actually like love, like it's kind of like, the cut fruit situation is like it's very similar to that, like where it's like they're not really expressing it like verbalizing it necessarily, but there is a lot there. And I think just growing up for me in a Western culture, I think there was a time period in my life where I was like, damn, like, you know, they don't really like care or like otherwise if they did, like they would say it, and like there's been a lot of work with like, hey, like there's just different expressions of love, and that doesn't mean it's less than just because it's not verbalized.
Mhm.
But I think there's also validity to wanting certain things verbalized because that's sort of a preference that you may have. And so I think, at least for my experience, it's just really sitting with like both, that both can exist. And then changing the storyline, at least for me, of like, oh, my parents are not doing enough, or like whoever I'm translating love for, like they're not doing enough or they're doing less or like blah blah blah, and change it to like, okay, let me actually like, fully receive the response as it is. Let me be amused or like enjoy like how they actually share
Yeah.
their love. And I think it's kind of funny because I feel like adulthood, especially as an Asian American, I think there's sort of this like returning home to like how things were like for at least for me as like a child, like being able to receive that fully. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. You catch anything else? Like that's how I.
I mean, the one thing I caught from what you shared was that, well, I'll just speak to my personal experience. When her mom said, "Welcome to the family," that was my that's all I needed to hear. I was like, oh my God, thank you. Like, yes, like approval, you know, but and at the same time, like what Steph was saying is like, yeah, like I too also wish it was a little bit more emotive, like a celebration and yeah, just you never know how that moment's gonna play out in your life. And um ours was kind of depleting, you know. And so I think that was important to um just take note of because I think it's okay to know like what you want and to not like hate on it at the same time um and use that as a launching pad um to what you were saying earlier, like just kind of laugh about it when they're loving you in this one way. And that like if I'm able to kind of humor myself on how they're loving me back, I can kind of move myself out of this serious binary mode of they're not loving me the way that I want to be loved, which is very much uh, an American way that I was raised up in. So I think that that kind of that theme went to move on into like the story with my mom as well. So um, I'm a single only child. My mom is a single mom, and so yeah, like I'm pretty much all she has. And so my mom was the boss battle, okay? Like her parents easy, but my mom, you know, with that context, her only son, single mom, like how are you gonna tell her? And
Yeah,
my mom
well,
was
for context, you all, like I feel like with Keto and his mom, we had to be maybe even more
like extra
yeah,
strategic.
yeah, just I don't want to say strategic, but just like very thoughtful, I
Yeah, yeah,
think, because I have a best friend who also raised her son by herself, and there's sort of this like, it's just been them two for a very long time in their life, and so I felt like we had to be very thoughtful about how we broke the news to his mom because we're new character, we're like bringing in like somebody new,
yeah,
and I felt like we had to be yeah, just thoughtful about that.
yeah, for sure. So this was our plan. The plan to minimize the most explosions as possible. So the first part was I was going to tell my mom earlier in the afternoon. And then I booked a nice restaurant near the ocean with Steph and my mom and myself for later that night for dinner. And if she was going to be upset when I told her earlier, then I would just tell Steph not to come and it would just be me and my mom. And if things went well, then we just continue with the plan. Um, I chose a beach restaurant because my mom loves taking photos and it was like sunset view. So like even in best case scenario, you know, where she doesn't get upset, there is a little bit of like a distraction for her to take photos and be hyped up about the evening and not have to like sit in this like processing mode of like, oh my God, like they're married. And so it was just this one day we were doing yard work, we were gardening, and she set me up. She was like, she said in Vietnamese, basically, she was like, "Chừng nào cưới vợ," which means like, so when are you gonna get married? And I looked at her and I was like, so regarding that, mom, like, okay, yeah, you have a seat, have a seat. And she just kept going on doing her thing. She was still like plucking her flowers, whatever. And I was like, all right, fine. 20 minutes goes by. I finally get her attention. She sits down and I told her like, so regarding what you said earlier, we signed the papers. And she looked up at me. My mom's like 5'1", and she was just like looking up at me like this. And she's like, why didn't you tell me? And it's like, oh, fuck. And she just turns around and walks into the bathroom and takes a shower. She's like, I'm just gonna take a shower. So I text Steph. I was like, ooh, like, I just told her. I think it went okay. I think she's just processing. I just got to give her some time. 5 minutes later, she comes back out and she's like, hey, my muang hong, which means she's offering Vietnamese dessert to me. And so I was like, we so I was like, okay, that It's a positive sign because one, she is willing to offer me food. She's not just any food. She's willing to offer me dessert. And Steph's gonna be coming here in 20 minutes with flowers. I think we're on the right track. Steph comes, brings the flowers. I accept my dessert and eat it, and like she never mentions it. My mom never talks about what I just shared.
Yeah, so I walk in, I give her the flowers, and she looks at me and she's like, oh, I really needed these for the altar. So she takes them and she goes to the altar and leaves them there. And I'm just like, shit, am I supposed to,
Nothing was
yeah, like
acknowledged.
literally did
Okay.
not say anything. And I was like,
Yeah.
I know that KDo just told her, am I supposed to say something? Like, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
And so,
So we didn't say anything. We just played it off and continued to go dinner. But
yeah.
what was going on in your head?
So what was going on in my head was just like, I felt like I should mention it, but I just wasn't sure what her comfort levels are. I wasn't sure if like she maybe didn't want to talk about it because she was still processing. Like there are like so many like different things that could be happening in her mind. But I was like, okay, I'm gonna just wait till dinner before doing anything, just to like give her a little bit more time. And so yeah, we decided to head to dinner.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we go to dinner and got to a nice resort. There was a nice beach restaurant. We sat down, we ordered all of our food, got all our nice entrees, and the sunset was happening. The sun was going down. It was a beautiful sunset. And so like right before we were about to get our food, my mom pulls out her camera. She starts taking pictures like for the next 30 minutes, like doesn't even
Doesn't
like
even eat.
doesn't even eat, doesn't even talk. Okay, like she's having the time of her life. And when she finally sits down, I'm like, okay, like I gotta like push the conversation forward a little bit more. And like I grabbed Steph's hand and I was like, so this is my wife. And my mom was just like, yeah, like she just laughed, and I was like, so do you approve? And she was like, what do you think? And so I like that was perfect for me, but how was that for you?
Um, I think I had a moment where like a brief moment where I was like, "Ah, but that's not a yes, you
Mm,
know?" And I think like what I caught in my own that translation process, right? Like, of course it's a yes. Like that's like what it is.
mhm.
But I think I've grown because of like Western culture, like I've grown to want an explicit like answer.
Yeah.
And so for a second I was like, oh, I don't know if that's like it. But then I was like, well, is there even a point to trying to get a yes? Like that doesn't really make sense, if you read between the lines here, like that is absolutely a yes.
Mhm.
And so I did have a moment where I was like, is it? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. And I caught myself sort of like in that translation process, again, thinking like, oh, it's not quite what I wanted, but like it does actually make sense. And when you really sit with it, it's like, oh my God, it's like the best response you could possibly get, like
Mm,
from like an Asian parent. And so
mm.
that's what I was sitting with.
Yeah. I mean, so the translation examples in in my mom's story was her giving me the dessert, um, her receiving Steph's flowers well, and her just continuing to have the time of her life taking photos at the beach and stuff like that. So like her just carrying on and not really acknowledging what happened, but just having a grand time, had to translate that as like, yeah, she probably doesn't know how to talk about it, but like she's still bidding to us in a different way, and like the vibes are still high, and so that's kind of like what we had to do on the back end. And I don't know if you wanted to just like summarize like what was going
Yeah.
on your side.
Well, during dinner, actually, like I think my way, and again, this session that we're not just talking about like translating love, but also like asking for what you're looking for, right? And so the way that I engaged with KDo's mom after was actually like, hey, like, I asked her when he went to the restroom and think like, hey, is there anything, now that we're married, is there any wish you have for us? Because I felt like that was the way that you can, engage an Asian parent, like basically show them like I have respect for you because you know, I want to know what it is that you want us to do, and what traditions you may want us to follow, and like what are, you know, things that you see for us. And so I asked her that, and so she talked about, you know, for her at least, like meditation and mindfulness is really big in like KDo's family. And so she's like, yeah, I want for you guys to you know, go to a 10-day like meditation retreat, and like call it a day basically. And so that was my way of still kind of getting that yes from her basically, and like also having a conversation about it, because like that's important for me, even if she wasn't going to necessarily initiate that conversation.
Yeah, so you got the yes in a different way. Like
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
explicit in
yeah.
like still moving forward the conversation of like union between
Hmm.
you and me, but asking it in a different way, which I think was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.